I was born with a curiosity to explore the realms of darkness, to seek out the elusive shadows and question their existence, their never-ending convolution with the light. All things were born from this darkness.
The Nuuanu Pali Lookout, Oahu, Hawaii. Towering above the Nuuanu Valley, the Nuuanu Pali Lookout is the site of the final conflict between warring tribes, unifying Hawaii under the rule of King Kamehameha I. In February 1795, King Kamehameha invaded the southern shores of Oahu, thus beginning the Battle of Nuuanu Pali. In the time prior to the invasion, the king had managed to amass the largest army in Hawaiian history. Over 12,000 warriors stormed the beaches of Waikiki in honor of the king and unification of the Hawaiian Islands. The warriors of Oahu were outnumbered and forced into the Nuuanu Pali Pass. Flanked from all sides, the Oahu warriors were forced further up the cliff. High atop the peak of the Nuuanu Pali, 1,000 feet above the landscape, the defeated Oahu warriors were pushed or forced to jump from the cliff. No one is for sure of the exact number of the Oahu warrior deaths, but in the late 1800s, construction crews working on carving out a new road unearthed over 800 human skulls dating back to the time of the war. Strange things have been reported ever since. The shadowy figures of warriors falling to their deaths is often witnessed by tourists. It's common to hear the screams and war cries of the ancient warriors throughout the trees, or the rhythmic chants and beating drums as the phantom warriors climb the cliffside. The peak of Nuuanu Pali is the windiest location on the island of Oahu, with gusts sometimes reaching 100 miles per hour. Some believe that these extreme winds are the winds brought upon by the falling warriors as they plunge into the valley below. It is common belief in Hawaiian culture that, when we sleep or are unconscious, our soul, or uhane, travels the plane of existence in search of knowledge and experience. The uhane return to our bodies when we awaken. When we die, our uhane travels the land until it reaches the portal between the living and the dead. It is believed that this portal lies at the base of the Nuuanu Pali Lookout. A troubled uhane will become lost in search of the portal, forever doomed to roam between the living and the dead. While researching, I've unearthed hundreds of deaths linked to the Nuuanu Pali area. It was a beautiful night on Friday, March 14, 1975. 13-year-old Dawn Bustamante and her best friend Cherry McCoy were walking to the market to meet with some friends when a 1960s Plymouth Valiant pulled up alongside them. Brandishing a gun, he forced the two young girls into his car and headed toward the Nuuanu Pali Lookout. On a dark and secluded back road, the kidnapper raped Dawn and told the girls to walk into the woods, guns still pointing at their heads. He violently approached Dawn, striking her in the head with the butt of his gun. She fell to the ground unconscious. The attacker then turned his attention to Cherry and hit her in the same fashion. She tried to pretend she had been knocked out, but the attacker began choking her. As Cherry was mere moments from death, Dawn regained consciousness and ran for help. This enraged their assailant and he ran after her. Cherry got up as fast as she could and ran the other way for the Nuuanu Pali Highway. As she ran, battered and cut from the sticks and thorns of the exotic landscape, she heard a single gunshot echo throughout the mountains. Dawn Bustamante's body was found soon after. Although Cherry lived to tell their story, she's haunted by the constant thought of her best friend, whose life was taken, and of the murderer who still lurks today. To date, Dawn Bustamante's killer's never been caught. Some have seen the apparition of a girl roaming the Nuuanu Pali Highway. An officer from the Honolulu Police Department, District 5, was working the graveyard shift. Their shift included the Nuuanu Pali Highway and Nuuanu Pali Overlook. The long and winding road to the lookout is treacherous and tedious to navigate. The officer was responsible for locking 2 gates and closing the lookout. Approaching the first gate, she got out to lock it. As she drove further up the dark and winding road, she saw a figure in all white walking in the darkness. The officer knew this was no ordinary human. She had heard the stories of other officers driving the Nuuanu Pali Pass and encountering a ghostly woman in white. The officer watched as the figure disappeared. She wasn't able to take her eyes off the road in front of her. There was a feeling in the air, a heaviness that made the officer uneasy. As she continued up the winding road, she saw the ghostly woman in her rearview mirror. She was sitting in the back of the squad car with her head down, not saying a word. Remembering her training, the officer remained calm. She calmly talked to the spirit in the back seat, but the ghostly woman said nothing and kept her head down. As the officer approached the Nuuanu Pali tunnels, she was overcome by a feeling of peace. She looked back at the figure, but it was gone. Kaimuki House, Kaimuki, Hawaii. Known as the Amityville of Hawaii, the Kaimuki House is haunted by a demonic entity from Japanese folklore. The kasha was an invention of Japanese artist Toriyama Sekihan in 1776 when he merged his imaginative influence with Buddhist beliefs. In his book Gazu Hiyaki Yogyo, or The Illustrated Demon Horde's Night Parade, Sekihan depicts the kasha as a terrifying feline covered in flames. The kasha are known to come during funerals, riding along the lightning and thunder to eat the souls of the recently deceased sinners, damning them to walk the earth forever. Over the years, the story became so popular that it was adopted into Japanese culture. It's common for priests to perform 2 funerals on the deceased in order to trick the kasha. Japanese immigrants migrated to Hawaii in the thousands. Between 1885 and 1924, 120,000 Japanese immigrants settled in Hawaii, making up over 40% of the population. Much of the Hawaiian culture we know today is heavily influenced by the Japanese. On a summer night in 1942, police were called to the home on the corner of 8th and Hardin, the Kaimuki House. For an hour and a half, officers helplessly watched as something unseen battered and terrorized the family. The home consisted of a single mother and her 3 children. The officers reported that, upon arrival, the 3 children, a 20-year-old female, her 18-year-old sister, and their 10-year-old brother were on the couch screaming and crying incoherently, while their mother prayed and waved tea leaves in front of them. The oldest of the siblings was being choked by an unseen force. This force seemed to attack the children one by one. The mother screamed, "She's trying to kill my children." But all the officers could do was watch. The police escorted the family to a relative's house. They never returned. The house changed hands many times throughout the years, and it wasn't long before the police were once again called to assist in a violent attack on a woman by an unseen force at the home. When the officer arrived, the 3 young women who were sharing the house were hysterical. They told the officer they were hearing noises and voices when one of them was suddenly grabbed by an unseen hand. The terrified women asked for the officer to escort them to a relative's. As the officer was following behind them, he saw one of the women thrashing violently, as if being attacked. They quickly pulled to the side of the road. The officer ran to the car, reaching in to assist the woman, but he couldn't see anything that could be causing the attack. It wasn't until a powerful phantom hand grabbed his arm that he radioed for backup. By the time backup arrived, the officer was as white as a ghost. He told the arriving officer, quote, "There's a ghost in that car," unquote. The women were crying hysterically. The second officer escorted the woman that was attacked to his squad car, but the car wouldn't start. It wasn't until the woman was back in the original car that the officer's car started right up. As they escorted the women, they watched as the car door swung violently open. The woman was thrown out of the car and onto the street. The other women were screaming. She grasped at her throat and gasped for air. The 2 officers were unable to pull her hands away. Kapiolani Park, Honolulu, Hawaii. Kapiolani Park is the largest park in Hawaii. The park was dedicated to the public in 1877 by King Kalakaua and named after his wife, Queen Kapiolani. They were the last ruling monarchs of the Hawaiian Kingdom before being annexed to the U.S. in 1893. The history of the park dates back long before the Hawaiian monarchy. An ancient sacred temple, a Hawaiian heiau, was discovered on the park grounds. In ancient times, these heiau served as sacrificial temples. Animal and human blood sacrifices were offered to the gods for protection and good health, among other things. The ancestors of native Hawaiians believe that these ancient ruins hold omnipotent power that can open the portal to the underworld. Kapiolani Park is where King Kamehameha and his warriors began the invasion of Oahu in 1795. one of the bloodiest battles in Hawaiian history. It was said that there wasn't a single speck of sand that wasn't covered in the blood of the ancient warriors. The Oahu warriors that survived the attack became prisoners of war and were sacrificed at the heiau in Kapiolani Park. Today, both natives and tourists claim to see the apparitions of warriors running into battle. Their war cries echo throughout the park. Strange balls of light and eerie screams have been reported. Many have heard the beating of war drums and ancient chanting coming from the darkness. Upon visiting Kapiolani Park in 1866, Mark Twain wrote in his journal of finding bones scattered all along the park. He took a few specimens back for study, not realizing that it was the bones of ancient Hawaiian warriors. In the middle of the park, there's a tree that became infamous after a suicidal man hanged himself. People often claim to hear whispers coming from the tree. MacKenzie State Park, Pāhoa, Hawaii. MacKenzie State Park was named after park ranger Albert MacKenzie in 1939 following his death. He was 65 years old when he passed away. MacKenzie played an instrumental part in the reforestation of Hawaii after volcanic activity burned a portion of the vegetation. The ironwood trees planted in the park were planted by MacKenzie not only for the reforestation, but also because the trees act as a natural windbreaker, protecting the local vegetation from the raging winds of tsunamis. In the 1850s, Oahu prisoners were used to excavate and landscape the park. Many prisoners perished from exhaustion, thirst, and heat amongst the hot and humid Hawaiian air. The prisoners that succumbed to death were buried somewhere in the park, although no records document their exact location. The apparitions of these lost souls are often seen roaming the shaded park. Many people often feel intense feelings of dread in and around the area. Many Hawaiian natives believe the park is along the route of the Night Marchers, an infamous band of phantom warriors that is often seen screaming into battle. The warriors perished in the Battle of Nuuanu, Pali, and are doomed to march into battle night after night. It is said that if you hear the beating of the drums during a full moon, you must throw yourself to the ground and bury your face. Looking upon the marching night warriors means death. The MacKenzie State Park is one of the many spiritual portals that surround the islands, and many native Hawaiians believe the ohane, or lost souls, walk the park at night in search of paradise. Many people hiking the park claim to hear phantom footsteps chasing after them. A local woman was walking the trails when she spotted another woman ahead of her on the path. The other woman turned to her, smiled, and then vanished. Animals behave strangely at the park, and camping tourists often report fireflies flying all around them, even though there are no fireflies at Habitat Hawaii. Fishermen that are out near dusk often see the strange glowing fireballs that burn along the cliffs. They dance around the surf and disappear into the sea caves below. The park is riddled with deep holes in the ground called lava tubes. Lava tubes are caused by volcanic activity. Many claim to hear whispering voices coming from the darkness of the lava tubes. Superstitious Hawaiians believe the voice is that of Pele, the fire goddess that created the Hawaiian Islands. In 2001, 3 teenage girls decided to camp at MacKenzie State Park. The 3 girls had been friends for a long time, and it was well known to all of them that one of them habitually talked in their sleep. They were just getting settled in for the night when they suddenly heard the girl talking in her sleep. They thought it was strange that she had fallen asleep so fast. She talked in an eerie, childlike voice that was somehow not childlike at all. The thing she was saying was very bizarre and confused the other 2 girls. They both turned back to look at their sleeping friend, but was surprised to see her wide-eyed and mouth gaping. Shakily, she said, "Guys, that wasn't me. I have been awake this whole time." A tourist was taking photos of MacKenzie Park as dark approached. As she was snapping the shots, a wave of oppression came over her. She had never felt anything like it before. Her eyes darted toward the cliffs, raging waves crashing against them in violent juxtaposition. She suddenly knew someone had died there. She felt it. She decided to get out of there as fast as she could. On the way out, she set her GPS to the hotel she was staying at. She traced the dark and winding road until she came upon a familiar sign, the MacKenzie State Park entrance. She had been driving one direction for hours and somehow ended up back where she started. Campers have reported being startled awake in the dead of night by a blood-curdling scream, and some have even had the zippers of their sleeping bags pulled down by something unseen. It was a beautiful night on April 23, 1980, at MacKenzie State Park. 28-year-old Philip Wolsk and his fiancée Judith Pankow were among the few camping at MacKenzie Park. Sometime before dawn, the two were violently attacked. Philip was bludgeoned to death, but Judith survived but was critically injured and permanently paralyzed. Their attackers are still at large. On the night of August 22, 1993, 16-year-old Sequoia Vargas went missing. She was watching TV with Richard Serrano and two of his friends when they drugged, raped, and beat her. When she woke up screaming, they panicked. One of the men punched her and threw her into the trunk of his car. They took her to the desolate MacKenzie Park, where they threw her body over a 20-foot cliff. When Serrano heard a moan come from the cliffs 20 feet below him, he decided to rappel down and swim her out to sea. Whether or not this is true, we'll never know, because her body has never been found. Serrano fled the United States 2 days after Vargas's disappearance. Sequoia Vargas's ex-boyfriend, Joshua Curry, saw her the night before she disappeared and was scheduled to testify in court at her murder trial, but he disappeared days before and has never been seen again. Joshua Curry's roommate killed himself shortly after Curry went missing. In 2008, while filming the movie The Tempest, film crews discovered the body of a local surfer. He had been shot multiple times and thrown off a cliff. 76-year-old Michael Rosenbaum was last seen alive on July 22nd. His decomposing body was found with a gunshot wound to the head near the shore break at MacKenzie State Recreation Area on July 31st. The rough and perilous cliffs at MacKenzie State Park have taken the lives of many fishermen. During high surf, the turbulent waves of the Pacific can get to 50 feet in some areas, crashing along the cliffside, taking with it anything in their path, including fishermen. People who drown here are rarely ever recovered, forever lost in the deep blue depths of the ocean. Pearl Harbor and the U.S.S. Arizona, Oahu, Hawaii. On December 7, 1941, the world would be forever changed, or, as Franklin D. Roosevelt said, a date which will live in infamy. At 7:48 a.m., Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor, thus beginning the United States' involvement in World War II. U.S. servicemen awoke that Sunday morning to the chaos of nearly 2 tons of explosives raining down upon them and the sirens screaming, "Air raid Pearl Harbor, this is not a drill." At 8:10 a.m., a 1,800-pound bomb hit the U.S.S. Arizona, igniting it into a flaming inferno. The explosion was so violent, the ship reportedly lifted out of the water, was torn in half, and sunk to the bottom of the harbor within 14 minutes. A survivor recalls seeing fellow crewmen jumping into the harbor to escape. As oil leaked out of the burning ships, it coated the crewmen in an unquenchable fire. All he could do was watch as they wailed in agony before succumbing to the blackened depths of the Pacific. The U.S.S. Arizona was the largest ship in the Navy's fleet, boasting a length of 608 feet and a displacement of 31,400 tons. Of the 1,511 crewmen aboard the Arizona, 1,177 lie at the bottom of the harbor, entombed within a watery grave. Within 90 minutes, the Japanese managed to damage or destroy 19 battleships and 347 American aircraft planes. 1,143 American soldiers were wounded, and 2,335 were killed. Over half of those were aboard the U.S.S. Arizona. Although mostly submerged 40 feet below the ocean surface, the U.S.S. Arizona remained on fire for 2 days. Support crews working on cleanup and decontamination of the harbor reported seeing faceless figures engulfed in flames aboard the decimated flaming ship. Many people witnessed these faceless phantoms, but as soon as they would appear, they would disappear back into the flames before you could even say a word. Today, the harbor is a graveyard of historical tragedy and remembrance. 1.8 million visitors travel to Pearl Harbor every year to pay their respects and to remember the tragedy of that fateful December morning. Both natives and tourists have heard the wailing cries coming from under the ocean. Some claim that the cries are coming from deep within the submerged U.S.S. Arizona. In retaliation to the Japanese attack, the U.S. dropped an atomic bomb on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing 226,000 people.